This is my ranking of games like Fallout 4 that I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each game is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how immersive the world feels, how good the exploration is, and how much it keeps me coming back. Let's get straight into the list. Generation Zero starts with a quiet but tense setup, placing me in an open world where machines have taken over a peaceful countryside. As I moved through forests and empty towns, the atmosphere stood out, especially during slow exploration where every sound mattered. Searching houses and gathering supplies felt natural at first, and there were moments where the world design created real tension before any fight even began. But once combat started, things often became messy, with enemies reacting in strange ways and fights dragging longer than expected. Progress didn't always feel clear, and I spent a lot of time wandering without direction. Bugs and technical issues also showed up often, making simple tasks harder than they should be. This one settles into the good tier. Atomfall starts by placing me in a strange quarantine zone with no clear direction, letting me figure things out on my own from the very beginning. As I explored the countryside, I liked how the world encouraged curiosity instead of guiding me with markers, pushing me to pay attention to small details and clues. The setting felt unique, with a strong British identity that showed in its characters, locations, and small interactions. Combat required patience, since rushing in usually led to quick failure, so I had to think before every encounter. There were moments where fights felt inconsistent, but learning how to approach situations made a big difference over time. The choices I made during quests also carried weight, shaping how events played out later. This one finds its place in the great tier. Dying Light. The beast starts by throwing me back into a familiar parkour survival setup, but this time with a darker twist tied to a more aggressive and brutal playstyle. Moving across rooftops and avoiding danger at night still feels tense. The new monster abilities add a different layer during fights, letting me deal heavy damage in short bursts. Exploration across the map stays engaging, with a mix of urban areas and open spaces that support different playstyles. The story doesn't go very deep, but side activities and encounters helped keep things interesting. Combat can feel repetitive at times, yet the overall loop remains satisfying and easy to stick with. This one ends up landing in the excellent tier. Surroundead begins in tight, dark spaces filled with zombies where every sound and movement matters right from the beginning. The atmosphere feels strong early on, with detailed sound design that makes it easier to track where enemies are coming from. I liked how simple the gameplay is, with resource management, light puzzles, and constant decisions about what to carry. The level design offers multiple paths in some areas, giving a bit of replay value and different ways to handle situations. But the experience doesn't stay consistent, as enemy behavior can feel predictable or awkward at times, which breaks the tension and slows things down. It ends up sitting in the mediocre tier. Days Gone begins with a biker surviving in a post-apocalyptic world. Riding the bike becomes a big part of the experience, and I liked how it handled once upgraded, making travel feel smooth and important. The standout moments came from facing large hordes, where planning and quick movement were needed to survive, creating some intense situations. Combat felt solid, especially melee, with crafting adding more options during fights. But over time, missions started to feel repetitive. The story also lost direction at points, making it harder to stay invested as things went on. Technical issues showed up occasionally as well, which didn't help the pacing. This one finds its spot in the great tier. Cyberpunk 2077 begins by placing me in a massive, futuristic city filled with choices, where almost every action feels like it can lead to something different. As I explored Night City, I noticed how dense and detailed the world felt, with side missions offering stories that were just as meaningful as the main path. I liked how much control I had over how to approach situations, whether through stealth, combat, or dialogue, which kept things fresh across many hours. Character building added even more flexibility, letting me shape my playstyle in different ways. The story had strong moments, especially through its characters and interactions, which made decisions feel important. There were technical issues at times, but they didn't take away from the depth and variety the game offered. This one stands tall in the masterpiece tier. The Outer Worlds 2 begins with a familiar RPG setup, placing me in a corporate-driven sci-fi world where choices shape how different factions respond to me. As I progressed, I liked how the writing handled moral decisions, often forcing me to choose between outcomes that didn't have clear right answers. Character building felt deeper this time, with skills and perks pushing me to think carefully about how I wanted to play. Combat was improved compared to before, feeling smoother and more responsive, which helped during longer sessions. Exploration across different planets stayed interesting, with varied locations and companions adding personality to the journey. But the early part of the game felt slow, and enemy variety didn't hold up well over time, which made some sections repetitive. This one lands in the good tier. Terminator Resistance begins in a war-torn future where I fight alongside human forces against machines, following a story that connects closely to the original timeline. As I moved through its missions, I liked how it tried to stay true to the setting, especially with its environments and references that matched the tone of the series. There were moments where exploring smaller areas, completing side objectives, and making simple choices added some variety to the experience. Combat felt straightforward, with plenty of weapons and tools available, making it easy to handle most encounters without much resistance. But that also became a drawback since enemies didn't feel threatening enough and fights lacked challenge over time. The story had some decent ideas, even if the delivery didn't always match the setup. This one finds its place in the great tier. BioShock Infinite begins by taking me to a floating city that feels unique right away, with its bright visuals and detailed world building setting a strong tone early on. As I moved through Colombia, I liked how the story unfolded through its characters, especially the connection between Booker and Elizabeth. Combat stayed engaging with a mix of weapons and abilities, and the open areas allowed different ways to approach fights. Movement across the city also felt more dynamic, adding variety to encounters. There were a few slower sections, but they didn't take away from the impact of the overall journey. This one earns its place in the excellent tier. ELEX begins by placing me in a strange world where sci-fi and fantasy elements mix together, creating a setting that feels different from most RPGs I've played. As I explored, I liked how the world encouraged me to take risks, with strong enemies pushing me to come back later once I was stronger. The faction system added some variety, letting me align with different groups and shape parts of the story. The narrative itself had some interesting twists, and the characters made certain moments more engaging. But a lot of the experience felt rough around the edges, especially with combat balance and technical issues that made progress frustrating at times. Some systems didn't feel as polished as they could have been, which held them back from being more consistent. This one fits into the good tier. Mad Max begins in a harsh wasteland where survival depends on building strength, upgrading gear, and taking control of dangerous territories. As I spent more time in its world, I liked how everything connected to progression, from upgrading my character to improving the vehicle, which became a key part of the experience. Driving across the desert and engaging in vehicle combat stood out the most, with fast-paced fights that felt chaotic but satisfying. On-foot combat also had weight to it, making encounters feel impactful even in smaller fights. The world itself had a strong atmosphere, with different areas and activities keeping me busy for a long time. But as I continued, many tasks started to feel repetitive, with similar objectives repeating across the map. This one settles into the great tier. Outbreak Island begins with a survival setup mixed with a personal investigation, where I explore a mysterious island while trying to uncover what happened in the past. The idea of using a camera as both a story tool and a gameplay mechanic felt different, giving me a way to interact with the world beyond just collecting items. I liked the day and night system where daytime focused on gathering and building, while nighttime brought more danger but also better opportunities. Base building and crafting added some depth, making progress feel steady over time. The atmosphere and visuals stood out, creating a strong sense of isolation while exploring the island. But combat felt rough, and enemy behavior didn't always work properly, which affected the experience in longer sessions. This one ends up in the mediocre tier. Dying Light 2 Stay Human begins in a large infected city where movement plays a big role, letting me travel across rooftops while avoiding danger on the streets below. The parkour system felt smooth and responsive, making simple movement from one place to another feel engaging on its own. I liked how the day and night cycle changed the pace, with daytime focused on exploration and nighttime adding more risk while searching for better rewards. Combat offered a lot of options, especially with melee weapons and environmental tools, even if enemies didn't always feel challenging. The world had interesting characters and moments, but the main story didn't stay as strong throughout. Technical issues showed up often and affected the experience during longer sessions. This one settles into the good tier. Rage 2 begins in a colorful post-apocalyptic world where action takes the spotlight right away, focusing on fast combat and constant movement across different regions. As I played, the gunplay stood out the most, with weapons feeling powerful and abilities adding more ways to handle fights, making each encounter feel active and chaotic. Unlocking new skills over time helped keep combat fresh. Many objectives followed the same pattern, which made progression feel repetitive after a while. The story also didn't leave much of an impact, staying simple without strong moments to carry it forward. This one falls into the mediocre tier. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim Special Edition begins by placing me in a massive fantasy world where freedom is the main focus, allowing me to explore, fight, and shape my character in many different ways. As I traveled across its landscapes, I liked how every location felt worth exploring, with small stories, quests, and discoveries hidden almost everywhere. The sense of progression stayed strong, letting me build my character based on how I wanted to play without forcing a specific path. The updated visuals and smoother performance made the world feel more alive compared to earlier versions, even if some older elements were still noticeable. Combat wasn't very deep, but the variety of playstyles kept things interesting across long sessions. This one belongs in the masterpiece tier. Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl begins by placing me in a dangerous exclusion zone, where survival depends on careful decisions, limited resources, and constant awareness of my surroundings. As I explored, the atmosphere stood out the most, with harsh weather, strange anomalies, and unpredictable threats creating tension in almost every moment. I liked how the game didn't guide me much, forcing me to learn systems and adapt through experience. Gunfights felt intense, where even small mistakes could lead to failure, keeping every encounter meaningful. The world design and freedom added depth, especially when choosing how to approach different situations. But technical issues and inconsistent enemy behavior sometimes broke that immersion and made certain moments frustrating. This one secures a spot in the excellent tier. Rust begins with a simple survival setup where I start with almost nothing and have to gather resources, build shelter, and stay alive in a world filled with other players. As I spent more time on the island, the player interaction became the main focus, with every encounter carrying risk, whether it led to cooperation or sudden combat. I liked how progression felt tied to effort, from upgrading tools to expanding a base, which made small improvements feel meaningful. The world design supported exploration, with different areas offering new challenges and rewards. But the experience could turn frustrating, especially with constant threats from other players and progress sometimes depending on luck. Combat also didn't always feel consistent, which affected some encounters. This one claims a place in the great tier. ELEX 2 begins by bringing me back to a familiar world where different factions shape the direction of the story, giving me choices that affect how events unfold. As I explored, I liked how the world felt large and interconnected, with changes from the previous game adding some depth to the setting. The jetpack stood out as a key feature, making movement more flexible and opening new ways to explore areas that would otherwise be hard to reach. The world building and faction variety helped keep things interesting across longer sessions. But the experience struggled in key areas, especially with combat feeling clunky and inconsistent, which made many encounters frustrating. Some dialogue and quest design also felt uneven, which affected the flow at times. This one ends up sitting in the good tier. Far Cry New Dawn begins in a colorful, post-apocalyptic version of a familiar setting, where I return to a changed world that still follows a similar structure to earlier entries. As I played, the core gameplay loop stayed engaging, especially when clearing outposts and gathering resources to upgrade my base and equipment. I liked how progression tied into building and improving different systems, which gave a sense of steady growth over time. The map felt recognizable but had enough visual changes to keep exploration interesting in parts. Some side activities like expeditions added a bit of variety and gave me reasons to step away from the main path, but the story didn't feel very strong and certain elements felt repetitive after a while. This one finds its place in the good tier. That's my full breakdown. Your list might look different, and that's the fun of it. Share your list in the comments, and let's compare. Thanks for watching. Watch out!